in thinking out the limits of our most wishful thinking. That is to say, we're living in a world where we suffer and we have all kinds of problems. And let us feel free to speculate as to what would be the most delightful interpretation of all these problems that we could possibly invent. In other words, what I'm saying is this. Here we are, threatened with the annihilation of the human race, not only through atomic bombs, but through overpopulation, lack of proper soil conservation, everything you can imagine, everything my friend Aldous Huxley can think up as a terrible threat to the future of the race. We're confronted with this very, very seriously. And supposing, for the sake of argument, that the very worst is going to happen, we're all going to be annihilated, and the human race has no future, and everything is as black as it can possibly be. Let's take this as a point of departure. Then ask the question, if that is true, in other words, if the worst that could happen is going to happen, is there anything that would make up for it? Not necessarily, I'm not asking whether there really is anything that would make up with it. But supposing we could think up something that might, how would we think? Now, it's not entirely trivial and silly to ask such a question, because very many important discoveries that emerge in the arts and the sciences are the result of people playing quite freely with fantasies. In other words, not so long ago at MIT, one of the professors proposed to his students that they should invent a kind of being which had, say, 3 fingers instead of 5, or could only act with its nose, which had wings and claws and no fingers or something. He invented all kinds of strange organic creatures and then said, how would you construct machines and furniture and knives and forks and all ordinary everyday appliances for these creatures? And as a result of this pure fantasy, several important discoveries emerged. And so in the same way, what I want to do is to suggest the possibility of inventing a cosmology, not as a work of philosophy, but as a work of art. The intention of it is, let me repeat this, could we think up something, an explanation of human life and of the universe, which would justify all the problems, all the agonies from which we suffer, and make them seem infinitely worthwhile? Could we invent out of thin air an explanation of the universe that would do this? And let us essay this simply as a work of art, without asking at first whether it's true or anything of that kind. You see, people often accuse religionists of wishful thinking. When I think over the religions of the world, and I hear them accused of being wishful thinking, I really don't think they're very wishful. Think of what is promised you if you live a very good life as a good Christian. How are you going to end up? You do the very best. You're going to go to heaven. And think of the images of heaven which the human imagination has thus far produced. Who wants to go there? Nobody does. It's infinitely boring. Even the Islamic people, who have a little less inhibition, have thought up their idea of heaven, and it's really rather dull. Sickeningly blissful, forever. And in our kind of half-baked view of what the Hindus and the Buddhists teach, that if you get the state of nirvana, you'll be sort of blissfully suspended in a thin gas forever. It doesn't sound terribly interesting. I would say our religions have not begun to be wishful thinking. Why don't we really do some wishful thinking? Just as a speculation. This is a game. What would we really like to be true about this world? Now, first of all, let's say we've got to start from one firm premise. That is, we've got to accept the facts of life as they are. In other words, that this world is as beastly as it is. It includes concentration camps, hospitals with people being mercifully tortured to stay alive with incurable cancer, and all these things, you see. It includes all that. It includes the most ghastly, horrible things that actually happen. Now, what I want to suggest, first of all, is could I invent, out of sheer imagination, a justification for a world of this kind? So I could say, however terribly I suffer, and what is still more difficult, however terribly the people I love suffer, there might be a theory of the world which would make it all more than worthwhile. There might be some sort of understanding to which I could come, and then in retrospect look back on all the things I had gone through, all the terrors and all the horrors, and say, I'm very happy about the whole thing. It all worked out. It is worthwhile. It is wonderful. What would such an explanation have to be? So let's think it out. First of all, I think the first thing we would all agree about is that if the terrible things that can happen to us in life are in some way or other to be justified, we would like to feel that we ourselves were responsible for them. By that I mean, we'd like to feel that we're not simply the puppets of somebody else. We're not suffering because somebody else has been cruel to us. I think we'd all like to feel that if we suffer, we ourselves are responsible for it. Because the idea of a universe in which somebody else tortures you seems to me more repugnant to our basic emotions than one in which we feel that whatever happens to us happens at our own desire. Of course, this is very difficult to imagine when we are confronted with babies dying of cancer or syphilis. And we would say, how could they possibly be responsible for what's happening to them? So let us suppose, don't we have to think this way? That if these two qualifications are to be fulfilled, on the one hand, that I am responsible for everything which happens to me, and on the other hand, that the worst things that can happen have a justification which make them infinitely worth going through and experiencing, then we would have to say, wouldn't we, that in a way, all the frightening, terrifying things which a human being can undergo are in a way a dream. You see, I'm trying to find out what would make it tolerable. And what would make it tolerable is the feeling that somehow, sometime, we could wake up from it. We can all endure nightmares because we can awake from a nightmare. And suddenly find out what a relief. It was only a dream after all. And then really we feel rather happy about it. You see, just think of this for a moment, that if you could switch on any dream you liked every night when you went to sleep, and you could control it, and you could exploit all the possibilities of fantasy and imagination in thinking what you would like to dream, you would eventually get bored with being so well controlled and with being so happy. And you would eventually have to, you would want to have some dreams which you didn't control, where you'd be surprised, where you would have adventures where you didn't know the outcome. It's curious, isn't it? We thrill ourselves all the time by going to plays and movies and reading novels where there is terrible suspense. And although we know that it's all going to come out all right in the end, we pretend for a while, sitting in the theater, that it isn't, that we don't know what the issue will be, and how we enjoy that. Do you see how we put ourselves for a while, even though we jolly well know that the author has planned all this to work out all right, that we allow ourselves for a while the illusion of thinking that it might not come out all right. And herein lies the thrill. Now, supposing in the same way our whole life was something of this kind, that its anxieties, its tragedies were the same kind of suspense and thrill that exists in a novel, and that we are undergoing it. What this would mean, wouldn't it, would be that we have within us a kind of higher self who is pretending to be the ordinary, everyday person that we are, who is acting it. That we are, in other words, that our everyday life is a dream from which we have the possibility of waking up. So let's, for the moment, simply assume this, not as a philosophical or metaphysical truth, but simply as an idea of pure fantasy. Supposing we are all dreaming our everyday life, and that there's a possibility of waking up from it. Now, let's go on to explore what kind of a dream this would be. Supposing you were saying to yourself, I would like to imagine the most fascinating form of life and existence which I could possibly conceive. You would first of all want to feel unfrustrated. In other words, you would want to feel that all your movements, all your desires could move in any direction without encountering a block. And what we mean by the sense of being physically frustrated, of the spirit being bound by the hard confines of matter, is the sense of being blocked, the sense of heaviness, the sense of bodily weight. When we're terribly tired, we feel the drag of our physical weight overwhelming us. And therefore, what we want to feel is lack of obstruction in any direction that we move. So ideally, we would like to feel a world which didn't resist our will at all, where the wish, the flight of imagination was instantly fulfilled. But when you think about that for a while, you realize that's not exactly what you would want. Because after a while, being able to accomplish everything wouldn't challenge you, would offer no adventure. And therefore, to make the creation of a fantasy worth doing, you would like something that you would have to overcome in the course of doing it. You would like some intractable material, something that presented a little difficulty in shaping. And so, I think we would all ask, and we would go out of our way to produce situations where we were confronted with difficulty. Supposing, for example, you find yourself or you imagine yourself in a situation where you can control everything. And you know always, therefore, exactly what is going to happen next. This would not, would it, be a pleasurable situation for very long? It would be boring. And after a while, you would want to get into a situation also where you were not in control, where things would occur to surprise you. But you might want to raise this qualification that I will let things surprise me as long as I can stand it. When I can't stand it, I'd like to be in control again. Now here is the nub of the whole problem of creating a universe as you would wish it to be. You would say, I would like to be surprised. I would like to be out of control up to a point. But I would always like to be able to call a halt and say, now I take over again. I'm in charge. But you see, the moment you think this, you would like to add to this problem of being out of control. You see, it would be all too easy if you could suffer and know any minute you press the button, you would recover. Think of this. Supposing you had a paradise button. Any time you press this, you could be in bliss. And so you'd start daring yourself. How far could you go out into all kinds of adventures and situations beyond your control and not press the paradise button? You remember as kids, on a hot summer day, when you were terribly thirsty, how good an ice cream soda would be. And you had just 10 cents that would buy it. But you put it off, and you got thirstier and thirstier and thirstier, because how grand it would be to be maximum thirsty and then have the ice cream soda. You see? And it's just like that. So we have the paradise button that we could push. I'm still talking in terms of my purely invented, fantastic cosmology, or universal order, scheme of things. And we could press it any time. Now, wouldn't it be fun to add to this a new dimension, that we'd forgotten where the button is? We've lost it. We don't know, and we're in, you see, scaring ourselves in a new way. First of all, we voluntarily let ourselves get out of control of the situation. Then to add to this, we forget that we're really in control and that we can press the paradise button. This is a new way of scaring yourself, a new thrill. And so we seem in this predicament to have lost contact altogether with the place from which we started. But this will only make sense, this will only answer the problem that I posed in the beginning. That is to say, the problem of what kind of cosmology could I imagine that would justify all possible sufferings? If we can wake up. We may have made it as difficult as possible to wake up. But nevertheless, there always remains a point at which we can wake up and recover from the nightmare. Now, many of you will already see quite easily that the kind of cosmology which I've been describing is nothing very new. This is, after all, Hindu philosophy. The idea that every thing, every being, every person in the world is Brahma playing the part, acting that he is all these things. The Godhead is masked, acting a drama in every single one of us, but forgets for the time being that he is the Godhead. This is Vedanta. And also, you know well that not only in India, but all over the world, there occurs to people from time to time a kind of experience that we call cosmic consciousness, or whatever it may be, in which they suddenly see that this is so. They suddenly see that this entire problematic world, with its horrors and evils and tortures, is a play. That it is simply, as it were, life playing hide and seek with itself, frightening itself, scaring itself, screaming at itself, accusing itself, making itself feel guilty for a great cosmic joke. Let me read a description of this sort of experience. There are dozens of these things throughout ancient and modern times, people who've suddenly had this happen to them. This is the description given by a very famous man, Richard Buck, who wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness. Now listen. All at once, without warning of any kind, I found myself wrapped in a flame-colored cloud. For an instant, I thought of fire, an immense conflagration, somewhere close by in that great city. The next, I knew that the fire was within myself. Directly afterward, there came upon me a sense of exaltation, of immense joyousness, accompanied or immediately followed by an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. Among other things, I did not merely come to believe, but I saw that the universe is not composed of dead matter, but is, on the contrary, a living presence. I became conscious in myself of eternal life. It was not a conviction that I would have eternal life, but a consciousness that I possessed eternal life. Then I saw that all men are immortal, that the cosmic order is such that without any peradventure all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation principle of the world, of all the worlds, is what we call love, and that the happiness of each and all is, in the long run, absolutely certain. The vision lasted a few seconds and was gone. But the memory of it and the sense of the reality of what it taught has remained during the quarter of a century which has since elapsed. So you see that the version of the world which I could construct or imagine out of fantasy is also very akin to things which people have experienced. And you can call these experiences hallucinations, wishful thinking, anything you like. It, at the moment, doesn't matter. Let's suppose that that's the way things are. In other words, that we are in charge, that there is, as it were, an inner self, an inner experiencer within us all, which is really in charge of things, which is the basic reality, which nothing can overwhelm or destroy, but which is, as it were, amusing itself by forgetting that it's in charge, by embarking on adventures and becoming subject to the feeling of not being in control. And however far it ventures into being out of control, the basic fact remains in the back of the whole thing that it is in control and that nothing can possibly happen to you which is not your own will. And we must add to this, to make our fantasy complete, that one day you'll wake up. Now, don't you think that on those terms, if that were the truth, you could face life with equanimity and say, well, there aren't really any problems. One of these days I'm going to wake up from the nightmare. It's all right. No matter how deep we go, it's all an adventure. It's all scaring ourselves. It's like children, just children.